But specifically, Dr. Gunaratna, if the U.S. understands the Bajinka plot, that weapons of planes could be used as weapons, how then, in not only understanding that plot, not only going back and knowing that a group had attacked the World Trade Center in 1993, how do you then avert 9/11 by following this one particular individual?
Sir, Mohammed Jamal Khalifa was in the Philippines and he was in touch with this group. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the more important man.
So you say eventually you get Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and that prevents 9/11 from occurring?
Absolutely, because Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the mastermind of 9/11. He organized that whole operation. The first planning meeting of 9/11 was held from the 5th to the 8th of January in Kuala Lumpur. Who chaired that meeting? Khalid Sheikh Mohammed chaired that meeting. The first two hijackers to enter the United States, they were present at that meeting. So the 9/11 operation is an extension of Oplan Bojinka. So the players of Oplan Bojinka, they were not all arrested.
International terrorism struck directly in the United States in February of 1993 when a truck bomb exploded in the parking garage of the World Trade Center in New York City. A second alarm sounded in June of 1993 when the FBI arrested 8 persons for plotting to bomb New York City landmarks, including the United Nations and the Lincoln and Holland tunnels. The central figures in these plots were Ramzi Youssef and Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, who was the spiritual leader of both the Gamma Islamiyah and Egyptian Islamic Jihad in Egypt. Although the Intelligence Committee has not established that bin Laden had a role in either plot, both Youssef and Rahman were later determined to have ties to bin Laden. Both 1993 plots featured the deliberate intent to kill thousands of innocents by a group composed of different nationalities without a state sponsor, characteristics previously absent from terrorist schemes. The new trend in terrorism became more apparent in January of 1995 when Philippine National Police discovered Ramzi Youssef's bomb-making laboratory in Manila and arrested his accomplice, Abdul Hakim Murad. Captured material and interrogations of Murad revealed Youssef's plot to kill the Pope, bomb the United States and Israeli embassies in Manila, blow up 12 U.S. airliners over the Pacific Ocean, crash a plane directly into CIA headquarters. These plans were known collectively as the Bajinka plot. Murad was eventually convicted for his role in the plot and is currently incarcerated in the United States. It is also worth noting that Murad was charged only for his involvement in the scheme to blow up the airliners over the Pacific and not for the other aspects of the Bajinka plot. Because the plans to crash a plane into CIA headquarters and to assassinate the Pope were only at the discussion stage, prosecutors decided not to include these plots in the indictment. FBI agents who were interviewed by the Joint Inquiry about the Bajinka plot confirmed this tight focus on the elements of the crime investigated and charged, explaining that the case was a plan to blow up 12 airliners, and therefore other aspects of the plot were not relevant to the prosecution. As a result, the Joint Inquiry was able to locate almost no references to the plan to crash a plane into CIA headquarters in the FBI's investigatory files on the case. The first World Trade Center bombing, the New York City landmarks plot, and the Bajinka plot pointed to a new form of terrorism. Plots revealed a growing threat from persons who ascribed to a radical interpretation of Sunni Islam. They involved the infliction of mass casualties, and they confirmed that international terrorists were interested in attacking symbolic targets within the United States, such as the World Trade Center. The increasing development of religious-based terrorist organizations in the 1990s contributed directly to the emergence of this new form. As Bruce Hoffman, a terrorism expert with the RAND Corporation, noted in a statement for the Joint Inquiry record, quote, "For the religious terrorist, violence first and foremost is a sacramental act or a defining duty," end quote. The new breed also focused on America. In testimony before the Joint Inquiry, former National Security Advisor under the Clinton administration, Sandy Berger, noted that the new terrorists were hardened by battle against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 1980s and energized against the United States by the military presence we left in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. First attack on the World Trade Center in 1993, 5 years before bin Laden openly called on his followers to bring jihad to America, was a clear signal that Sunni extremists sought to kill Americans on American soil. 7 years later, the arrest of Ahmed Rassam and the seizure of bomb-making materials in his car at the U.S.-Canadian border should have dispelled all doubt that al-Qaeda and its sympathizers sought to operate on U.S. soil, even though most of the terrorist masterminds remained overseas. Emphasis on mass casualties was another important change from the terrorism the United States witnessed in the 1980s. Although attacks in the 1980s sometimes were intended to kill hundreds of official and military personnel, for example, the bombings of the Marine barracks and the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, no major terrorist group attempted to kill thousands of civilians. Brian Jenkins, an expert on terrorism, wrote in 1975, quote, "Terrorists want a lot of people watching, and a lot of people listening, and not a lot of people dead," end quote. 20 years later, Director of the CIA, James Woolsey, contended, quote, "Today's terrorists don't want a seat at the table. They want to destroy the table, and everyone sitting in it," end quote. The 1999 edition of the FBI's Terrorism in the United States pointed out that the number of terrorist attacks had decreased in the 1990s, but the number of casualties had increased. Terrorism had evolved from a frightening, episodic danger that could kill hundreds to an ominous menace that directly threatened the lives of tens of thousands of Americans. It took some time for the intelligence community to recognize the emergence of this new form of terrorism. Joint inquiry interviews FBI personnel who were involved in the investigation of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing suggest that the intelligence community was initially confused about the new adversary. This form of terrorism featured Arabs from countries hostile to one another working together without a state sponsor. Counterterrorism experts eventually recognized the shift and incorporated it into their analysis. A July 1995 national intelligence estimate, for example, identified a new breed of terrorist who did not have a state sponsor, was loosely organized, favored an Islamic agenda, and had an extreme penchant for violence.